If someone had told me 10 years ago that the most painful place I'd ever sit would be my own in-laws' dining room, I would have laughed. Not because they were bad people, because I honestly believed love was stronger than money. I was wrong. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 38 years old, and for the last 12 years I've been married to the woman I still love more than anything in this world, Emily. People who met us usually assumed we had a normal marriage. We smiled in public. We held hands. We never argued in front of anyone. What they didn't see was how every family gathering slowly turned into a reminder that, in the eyes of my wife's family, I would never be enough. Not because I was cruel, not because I was lazy, but because they believed I wasn't rich enough. Ironically, they had absolutely no idea who I really was. The story really began 5 years earlier. Emily and I met at a neighborhood coffee shop. She was studying architecture. I had just left a meeting wearing faded jeans, dusty work boots, and a gray hoodie. She thought I worked construction. I didn't correct her. For the first time in years, someone spoke to me without asking what I did for a living or how much I earned. She liked me because I listened. Because I made her laugh. Because I remembered the little things. After 8 months of dating, I met her parents. That dinner should have been my warning. Her father, Richard Lawson, owned several luxury car dealerships across Arizona. Her mother, Victoria, organized charity galas that always seemed more interested in photographers than charities. The first thing Richard asked me wasn't my age, or my family, or how I treated his daughter. He asked, "So, Ethan, what exactly do you do?" I smiled. "I own a small manufacturing business." That wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. He nodded politely before asking another question. "And what kind of revenue are we talking about?" Emily immediately interrupted. "Dad." But he ignored her. I answered carefully. "We're comfortable." He leaned back in his chair. Comfortable usually means people don't want to tell the real number. Everyone laughed, except Emily. She squeezed my hand under the table. I squeezed back. I wanted her to know I was okay. The truth was, I wasn't. From that night on, every visit felt like an interview I could never pass. Richard compared watches, compared cars, compared vacations, compared houses. Everything had a price. Everything became a competition. When Emily and I bought our first home, I chose something modest. 3 bedrooms, a quiet neighborhood, enough space for a future family. Richard looked around during the housewarming party before saying, "It's cozy." The pause before the word cozy lasted long enough to hurt. Victoria added, "I suppose everyone has to start somewhere." Emily looked embarrassed. I simply smiled. I had learned something important. People who judge your success by what you display rarely notice what you keep private. The strange thing was, I actually could have bought the biggest house on the block, several times over. But I never wanted that life. My father had built our family company from a rented warehouse with only 6 employees. He used to tell me, "Money is loud only when people are trying to convince others they have it." When he retired, he transferred ownership to me, quietly. No magazine articles, no interviews, no social media announcements, just paperwork, exactly how he wanted it. Our company manufactured precision industrial equipment. Not exciting, not glamorous. But every major construction company in the Southwest used our products. Business kept growing every year. Most people had never heard our company's name. That's exactly how we liked it. Emily knew everything. She respected my decision to stay private, at least. I thought she did. Then little comments started appearing, almost invisible at first. "My parents think we're being too careful with money. They don't understand why you still drive that old pickup. Dad says successful people should look successful." I laughed them off, until she stopped laughing with me. One evening, she looked at my truck sitting in the driveway. "You know, maybe they're right." I looked at her. "About what?" "Maybe appearances matter more than you think." That sentence stayed with me much longer than she realized. Months passed. Family dinners became predictable. Richard always found a new way to remind me I didn't belong. One Thanksgiving, he announced he'd invested in another luxury dealership. Then he looked directly at me. "Ethan, opportunities come to people willing to take risks." I smiled. "I agree. So why stay small? I like building things." He laughed. "No, son, you like playing it safe." Everyone chuckled. Even Emily forced a smile. That hurt more than anything Richard had ever said. A few weeks later, Emily asked if we could attend her parents' annual Christmas party. It wasn't really a family gathering. It was a networking event disguised as one. Politicians, developers, lawyers, business owners. Everyone dressed like they expected a magazine photographer to appear at any second. I almost declined. Emily touched my arm. "Please." So I went. I wore the same navy suit I'd owned for years. Richard greeted me at the entrance. He looked me up and down before smiling. "Still wearing that old suit?" "I like this one." "I'm sure you do." He laughed before walking away. Inside the ballroom, conversations revolved around investments, private jets, and vacation homes. I quietly grabbed a glass of sparkling water. Standing near the back of the room suited me just fine. Then I overheard something that changed everything. Richard was speaking with two businessmen. "I don't care what it costs," he said confidently. "If I can acquire Baxter Industrial Systems next year, it'll double my manufacturing portfolio." One of the men nodded. "They're impossible to reach." Richard smiled. "Everyone has a price." I nearly laughed. Because the company he was determined to buy, the company he'd spent months chasing, the company he believed would make him one of the biggest industrial investors in Arizona, was mine. He had no idea. And I intended to keep it that way, for now. I took another sip of sparkling water and watched my father-in-law confidently promise investors that the deal was practically guaranteed. Across the room, Emily caught my eye. She smiled. But something about that smile felt different. It wasn't warm. It wasn't proud. It looked worried. That's when I realized this story was about to become much bigger than an arrogant father-in-law. Because my own wife seemed to be hiding something from me, I couldn't stop thinking about Emily's face on the drive home. For 12 years, I'd always been able to read her. When she was happy, she hummed while cooking. When she was stressed, she twisted the ring on her finger without realizing it. And when something was bothering her, she became unusually quiet. That night, she didn't say a word. The only sound inside my old pickup was the hum of the tires against the highway. Finally, I asked, "Everything okay?" She stared out the window. "I'm just tired." It wasn't an answer. It was an escape. When we got home, she headed upstairs without even saying goodnight. I stayed in the kitchen for almost an hour, looking at a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Something had changed. I just didn't know what. Over the next 2 weeks, Emily became distant. She still smiled. She still kissed me goodbye before work, but it felt automatic, like someone following a routine instead of living it. Then, one Saturday morning, I walked into the living room just as she ended a phone call. She looked startled. "Who was that?" I asked. "My mom." "What did she want?" Emily hesitated. "Nothing important." That pause lasted less than a second. But sometimes less than a second tells you everything. A few days later, Richard invited us to dinner. I almost declined. Emily insisted. "It'll make Dad happy." I nearly laughed. I couldn't remember the last time Richard cared whether I was happy. Dinner started normally enough. Victoria served expensive wine. Richard talked about the stock market. Then he leaned back in his chair and smiled. "So, Ethan, I've got an opportunity for you." "I'm listening." "I've been thinking about your future." That sentence alone made me suspicious. He continued. "You've worked hard, but let's be honest. Your little manufacturing business has probably reached its limit." Emily looked down at her plate. "I know several investors looking for dependable managers. I could introduce you." There it was. Not an offer. An insult wrapped as generosity. I smiled politely. "I appreciate the thought." "You should." He took another sip of wine. "Not everyone gets opportunities like this." "I already have an opportunity." "Oh?" "I enjoy building what I already have." Richard chuckled. "Sometimes pride keeps people poor." The table went silent. For the first time, I didn't answer. Because I realized something. He wasn't trying to help me. He genuinely believed he was better than me. That night, Emily apologized. "He doesn't mean it the way it sounds." I looked at her. "Then how does he mean it?" She didn't answer. Instead, she whispered, "Can we just let it go?" I wanted to, more than anything. But letting things go only works when they eventually stop happening. This wasn't stopping. It was getting worse. 3 days later, I got an unexpected call from my executive assistant, Laura. "Ethan, we've received another acquisition request." I already knew who it was. "Richard Lawson?" "Yes." I smiled. "What did he offer this time?" Laura named the number. It was impressive. Most business owners would have accepted immediately. I didn't. Same answer as before. "Not interested?" "Not even close." She laughed softly. "I'll decline it." "No." She paused. "Tell them we'll consider a meeting." There was silence on the line. "A meeting?" "Yes, but I think it's time I met the man who's been trying so hard to buy my company." The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. I didn't tell Emily. Not because I wanted to hide it, because I wanted to understand something first. Would Richard recognize my name? Would he connect Ethan Carter to Ethan Carter, owner of Baxter Industrial Systems? Or had he been so busy judging me that he'd never bothered to learn who I really was? Thursday morning arrived. I didn't wear my usual jeans. I put on a tailored charcoal suit, the kind I almost never used. Laura looked surprised when I walked into headquarters. "Big day?" "Maybe." She smiled. "The conference room's ready." 20 minutes later, Richard Lawson walked through the front doors with 2 attorneys and a financial consultant. He looked confident, like a man expecting another routine negotiation. Laura greeted him. "Mr. Lawson, Mr. Carter will be with you shortly." He nodded politely. "I've been looking forward to finally meeting him." I stood behind the tinted glass overlooking the lobby. He was less than 30 feet away, and he had absolutely no idea. I almost walked downstairs. Almost. Instead, I watched, because I wanted one more answer. When Laura casually asked if he'd met our owner before, Richard laughed. "No, but I've heard he's an older gentleman who's thinking about retirement." Laura kept a perfectly straight face. "I see." Richard smiled confidently. "Everyone retires eventually." I quietly turned away from the window. That told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't done his homework. He'd spent years looking at balance sheets, without ever looking at people. That evening, something happened I hadn't expected. Emily walked into my office at home carrying a folder. She looked nervous. "I need to ask you something." I closed my laptop. "What is it?" She sat across from me. "My dad thinks—" She stopped. I waited. "He thinks you should sell your business." I smiled faintly. "Does he?" "He says manufacturing is becoming unpredictable." "I'm aware. He says if you sold now, we'd never have to worry about money again." There it was, the sentence that finally made everything clear. I looked into my wife's eyes. "Emily?" "Yes?" "Did your father ask you to convince me?" Tears immediately filled her eyes. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence said everything. For the first time in 12 years, I realized my marriage wasn't just under pressure from my wealthy in-laws. It had become part of their plan. And if I wanted to save my family, I was going to have to reveal the one secret I'd spent years protecting. The truth about who I really was. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry. Anger comes and goes. What kept me awake was disappointment. For 12 years, I had believed Emily and I were protecting our privacy together. We had agreed that my family's business would stay out of conversations unless there was a reason to bring it up. I never wanted our marriage to become about money. Now I wasn't sure we had been protecting the same thing. The next morning, I made coffee before sunrise and sat on the back porch. Emily joined me a few minutes later. Neither of us spoke at first. Finally, she whispered, "You're disappointed in me." I looked at her. "I'm hurt." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I never wanted to betray you." "But you did." She nodded. "I know." After a long silence, she told me everything. It had started almost 3 years earlier. Richard constantly questioned why we lived in a modest house, why I drove an old pickup, why I refused expensive vacations. At first, Emily defended me. Then the questions became weekly, then daily. Eventually, her parents convinced her that I was holding our future back. "They kept saying you lacked ambition," she admitted. "That if I didn't push you, we'd regret it when we were older." I took a slow breath. "So they asked you to convince me to sell?" She nodded again. "They thought if we had enough money, everything would be easier." I almost smiled. The irony was unbelievable. We already had more than enough money. They just didn't know it. That afternoon, I made one phone call.
Laura? Yes, Ethan?
Schedule another meeting with Richard Lawson. The acquisition meeting?
Yes. This time, I'll attend.
She laughed softly.
I've been waiting to hear you say that.
Friday morning arrived. Richard entered the Baxter Industrial Systems headquarters with the same confidence he'd carried every other time. He still believed he was negotiating with an elderly founder preparing for retirement. Laura escorted him and his legal team to the executive conference room. A few moments later, she opened the door again. Mr. Carter will see you now. I walked in. For 2 full seconds, nobody moved. Richard stared at me. His attorney looked confused. One of his consultants actually checked the nameplate on the table. I smiled politely. Good morning. Richard blinked.
What are you doing here?
I took the seat at the head of the table.
I work here.
His forehead tightened.
No.
Laura placed a folder in front of him. Our CEO and majority owner, Mr. Ethan Carter. Silence. Complete silence. Richard slowly opened the folder. Inside were the corporate ownership records. My name. My signature. Every page confirmed the same thing. The company he'd spent nearly 2 years trying to purchase belonged to me. His face lost all color. He looked at me. You own Baxter Industrial Systems? I do. But you never asked. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. I know what you thought. For the first time since I'd known him, Richard had absolutely nothing to say. The meeting lasted less than 15 minutes. Richard tried to recover. He complimented the company, praised its leadership, talked about partnership opportunities. I listened patiently. When he finished, I folded my hands. Mr. Lawson.
Yes?
I appreciate your interest. He smiled hopefully. But Baxter Industrial Systems is not for sale. His smile disappeared. I believe every business has a price. My father used to disagree. He frowned. He built this company with 6 employees. I looked around the room. He taught me something I'll never forget. I leaned forward. Never sell something meaningful just because someone richer wants it. No one spoke. I stood. Our meeting is over. Laura opened the conference room door. Richard slowly gathered his papers. As he walked past me, he quietly said, I misjudged you. I answered honestly. No, you judged me exactly the way you judge everyone else. He lowered his head. For the first time, he looked like an ordinary man, not a powerful one. That evening, Richard asked if he could come to our house alone. Emily looked nervous. I agreed. He arrived without his expensive smile, without his confidence. He sat at our kitchen table for several minutes before speaking. I owe you both an apology. Neither of us interrupted. I spent years believing money was the best way to measure success. He looked directly at me. I never bothered to measure your character. Another long silence. Finally, he stood. I don't expect forgiveness. Then he left. Life didn't magically become perfect. Some wounds take time. Emily and I started marriage counseling, not because we wanted to save appearances, because we wanted to rebuild trust, real trust, the kind that isn't based on assumptions or outside opinions. Months later, she admitted something that stayed with me. I forgot why I fell in love with you. I squeezed her hand. And why was that? She smiled through tears. You never needed money to make people feel important. Almost a year passed. One Saturday afternoon, our family gathered for my birthday. Not at Richard's mansion, at our modest home. My old pickup still sat in the driveway, the same one everyone used to laugh at. Richard walked outside while I was cooking on the grill. He looked at the truck and smiled. You know, I raised an eyebrow. I've been thinking about buying one. I laughed harder than I had in years. I'm not sure it'd match your image. He laughed too. Maybe it's time I changed my image. Later that evening, my young nephew asked me a question. Uncle Ethan. Yeah? If you're so rich, why don't you live in a giant mansion? Everyone looked toward me. I smiled. Because a house isn't measured by its size. He frowned. Then what? It's measured by whether you feel safe when you walk through the front door. He thought about that for a moment, then nodded like it made perfect sense. Kids usually understand the important things faster than adults. Looking back now, I realize something. Richard didn't almost lose the opportunity to buy my company. He lost something much more valuable, Years with a son-in-law he could have respected from the beginning, all because he confused wealth with worth. Money can build buildings. It can buy cars. It can impress strangers. But it cannot replace kindness. It cannot purchase loyalty. And it certainly cannot earn respect. Respect is built the same way my father built his company, one honest decision at a time. So if someone ever looks down on you because of what you drive, where you live, or what they think is in your bank account, let them. The people who judge your value before they know your character are telling you far more about themselves than they will ever know about you. And sometimes, the richest person in the room is the one who never feels the need to prove it.